Would like to welcome you today to the Entrepreneurship Forum. And our guest speaker today is Mr. Terry Walker. And we're privileged to have him here to speak to us. I've known him for a number of years, as well as Rick Lambert. Terry has over 39 years experience in the business of residential mortgage lending. And for the past 17 years, he has owned Walker Mortgage in Holiday, Utah. It specializes in boutique mortgage financing, and maybe Terry can explain a little bit what that means. And he's also an adjunct professor of mortgage lending since 1979. Terry is also experienced in academics of real estate finance, and he is the former senior vice president and loan manager for First Federal Savings and Loan located in Salt Lake City. He's a rabid U of U fan, a rabid golfer, and he even likes to fish when he has nothing else to do in his time, and has a wonderful wife, Cynthia. So let's welcome Terry to our class today.
Thank you, Don. Appreciate that. They read it almost exactly as I wrote it. I started my business career in a job that no longer exists. I was the field examiner for the Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corp, Federal Home Loan Bank Board. The Federal Home Loan Bank Board was like the FDIC is, except they were for the savings and loan business. Now, there's only one savings and loan in all of Utah. There are only a handful in the whole United States. But when I was in that business, there were about 13,000 of us, and we dominated the mortgage lending world. Banks were in commercial, and we were in the residential and mortgage world. And so I cut my teeth, as it were, in that savings and loan industry. I worked for one of the last savings loans. I worked for one of the companies that became part of Washington Mutual. So what happened to Washington Mutual? Anybody know?
They merged with Chase.
Yeah, well, merge is a really, she said they merged with Chase. Merge is a very generous explanation of what happened. They went upside down totally, and part of the government's ability to bail them out was to push them into Chase. So you understand that savings and loans have federally deposited deposits and federally insured deposits. And so all of those people who had put their savings and checking accounts with Washington Mutual needed to be protected. And so the federal government has to either write out 15 or 18 or 35 or $100 billion worth of checks to all those savers and depositors, or they have to find a way to keep the institution alive. And so they merged them in with Chase. And so merge is just a really generous term for what happened. So, but I worked for one of the big California savings loans that became part of Washington Mutual, and they were literally among the last dinosaurs running full bore towards the tar pits. And they succeeded in getting to the tar pits, all of them. With the exception of one or two, Washington Federal Savings, who is still alive and well in Utah and the Northwest, acquired First Federal sometime after I left First Federal. So I have the distinction of working for one of the last really big dinosaurs and for one of the little tiny dinosaurs that has still managed to stay alive. So after I left California, I came back to Utah and started Walker Mortgage, which a boutique is, there are just two of us, my brother-in-law and I, and we don't have any employees, so we don't have any processors or funders. So when you deal with us, you deal with the owner 100% of the time. You never hand it off to some 21-year-old processor or some other person. If you deal with us, you deal with us. And between us, we have almost 60 years of lending experience. So, it's the difference between going to Nordstrom's and going to a little store where you know the owner. And that's what we are. We're the little store that knows the owner. But in my long and varied career, I have done pretty much everything you can do that involves real estate and lending. Now, if I had my life to live over, I would have gotten someplace else, I tell you that. The mortgage business today is the most difficult, mean-spirited, nasty, difficult business to be in of any you can imagine. And it's because of a misguided, mostly, federal regulation that just makes our life complicated and miserable. There's a law called HVCC. Let me just put that on the board. Home Valuation Code of Conduct. In the old days, you came to me for a loan and we said, well, we're going to have to do an appraisal on your house. I called an appraiser right while you were sitting there. Hey, Ray, this is Terry. I need you to appraise this house. I think it's worth about $240,000. Put the borrower on the phone to make an appointment. He's coming tomorrow to appraise your house. Tomorrow he comes and he calls me and says, Terry, I don't know what you're thinking, but this is nowhere near $240,000. It's going to be more like $210,000. Do you want me to finish? Yeah, it turns out it'll work. Or no, stop. Don't do anything more. Let me get back to you. The benefit of that is we stopped him and we didn't pay him his $400. So here's how it works today. You come to a broker and they say, I'd like a loan. We're going to need an appraisal. So in about a week after we do a series of mandated disclosures and waiting periods, I will call you and you'll give me your credit card and we'll prepay for the appraisal. So it used to be I'll collect it from you at closing. Now we're going to pay it up front. And now you own that appraisal, whether it's a good one or a bad one, doesn't matter. So then I choose the lender. The lender chooses a middleman whose official name is Appraisal Management Company. Those are AMCs. And the Appraisal Management Company chooses an appraiser. And here's how screwy it gets. I have this nice house in Holiday. There are probably 125 or 50 or 300 licensed appraisers in Salt Lake Valley. So I order an appraisal, and the next thing I hear, the appraiser has called my client in Holiday to say, how do I get to your house? I can't find it. When we get to the bottom of that, this appraiser has driven down from Heber to appraise a house in Holiday with little or no local knowledge of the Holiday market. Can't even find this house, which is not buried in the depths. It's not some flag lot in the middle of a subdivision. It's an easily found house. My second question is, so why don't you just use the GPS on your phone and drive to it? That's what I do when I'm lost. So instead of me choosing an appraiser that I know knows the area, that I can work with, that'll call me if there's a problem, and bill you when it's done successfully, you get to pay up front and have some guy from Heber come down who can't even find your darn house, let alone know how much it's worth. Thank you, federal government, for HVCC. That is one of the nastiest pieces of legislation that affects me. The benefit of federal legislation mostly is to protect you. There's this basic theory that says the mortgage world is the giant. We're the Philistine, if I can be biblical for a second. And the poor little client is the Israelite, David. And because David is so outmatched by Goliath, we're going to give David a bunch of protective barriers that restrict the predatory natural impulses of people in my industry to take advantage of David, of Goliath to brag about taking advantage of David. So we have this whole range of federal regulation which is intended to somehow protect David from Goliath. So years ago I was talking to somebody about the level playing field concept. And we were talking about, it would be nice if we were all in a level playing field. And he said, Terry, don't get too enthused about the level playing field. Remember this, the Christians and the Lions were on a level playing field, but it didn't help the Christians all that much. So the fact is, being on a level playing field does not take away the superior power, knowledge, influence, resources of the big guy. And it doesn't add anything to the little guy. It just puts a couple more Christians in the path. I have to eat 3 Christians now instead of 1 if I'm going to go and be the lion on this field. So now let's talk a little bit about entrepreneurs. I started my life as a federal employee, and in the course of examining a bank, as a bank examiner does, you're in the bank for a couple of weeks looking at all kinds of things. And we're looking at safety and soundness. Because the government has promised to make good on all those deposits, the government has an interest in making sure the bank, using that as a four-letter word, more a description than a specific bank, that the bank be managed safely and carefully, and that we not just throw away all these depositors' money because we have the government guaranteeing it. So we have these examiners, and we go into a bank and we look at loans and deposits and all kinds of things. We send out verifications. We're trying to find out, is this institution being run, managed carefully with an eye towards protecting their customers? And that's what an examiner does. Well, we were examining a local savings and loan when they had a turmoil. The chairman of the board retired. It's a small bank. Everybody moved up. There was an empty chair. And somebody said, well, let's talk to that young examiner. He seems like a sharp guy. And so, long story short, they offered me a job, and I went from a federal employee to a small cog on a fairly medium-sized wheel in the institutional lending environment. And for 25 years, I was in that treadmill. And how many of you read Dilbert in the comics? I stopped reading Dilbert a couple years ago because the pointy hair guy just reminded me too much of myself. I stopped watching The Office because whoever the star is, he reminded me too much of myself. So in that institutional world, the higher up you get, the more in prison you are. Literally, the more scrutiny you have. Somebody said to me one day, gee, Terry, you're a big wheel down at the bank. I said, no, I'm more like a fender. The fender's the one who catches all the crap that the big wheels kick up as they go around. So I'm not a big wheel, I'm a fender. But I became a big wheel. And I say that in a bragging sort of way, but just, sort of perseverance and stamina rose me to near the top. But the closer you get to the top, the more you're aware that if you don't get to the very top, you're like sled dogs. If you're not the lead dog, the view is pretty much always the same. And so if you're not going to be the sled dog, the lead dog, the whole magic of it, as soon as you realize that you're as far to the front of the pack as it's going to be, the whole magic of it sort of disappears. And I was helped along by a series of events that led to my being let go. And I let go mostly because my boss, who was a great guy, left and turmoil. And eventually they hired a guy who didn't know anything. And he fired, in a reasonably quick period, all of the people that had been first level reports to his replacement, the guy he replaced. So we used to talk in terms of 1 down and 2 down and 3 down as levels of management. And so I was 1 down from this guy, and his replacement just wanted his own team. That's reasonable, isn't it? I mean, I was frustrated and anxious and a little bit angry, but it's reasonable for that person to want their own team. And the higher you get, the easier it is to say goodbye. If you're just this person down at the worker bee level, and I'm unhappy with you, I got to document it about 40 different ways and write you up and put you on probation and give you a second, a third, and a fourth chance. And if and if you're a minority or if you're somehow protected under ECOA or something, I have to be triply careful. And eventually, about a year from now, I can probably fire you for non-performance. When you're a senior VP, you can be said goodbye in 10 minutes for not having ever done a thing wrong. I need my own guy. I can't be your guy? No, I don't think so. Okay, what's my severance package look like? That's sort of the way that conversation goes. Well, I was pretty discouraged anyway, and I was about 2 feet out of the door when the door just closed. Thanks and goodbye. So I said, well, I'll go do what I thought I should have done anyway. I'll start Walker Mortgage. And I started in California because that's where I was. And California had the 1990 property slump. And values fell a bunch, and every time you tried to do a loan for somebody, you couldn't get an appraised value. And none of the current rules that assist people who are underwater, if you know that term, were in existence there. So it was really tough. But I had a lot of family and 25 years worth of associations here, so I kept doing loans for people in Utah. And one day I said, you know, I do half my business in Utah, and it's the easy half. Maybe we ought to just move back. And so we moved back in 1996 and started Walker Mortgage. And people used to come and say, who knew me from before, and, oh, you know, before long you'll have this big company. I said, no, you don't understand. I've been in the big company. I've been near enough the top to know that I wasn't comfortable there. This is all I want. I just want my little deal, just Terry Walker Mortgage. And that's what we've done. We've deliberately stayed a little boutique. Now, here's the advantage of boutique lending to me. I used to have to keep 5 people ahead of me and 100 people below me happy. At some level, spent 60% of my working day keeping people happy. And now I just have to keep 1 or 2 people happy at any one time. Not counting my wife and family, 1 or 2 clients at any one time have to be reasonably happy, and I'm happy. I expect I will live at least 10 years longer. About 4 months after I quit, my wife said to me, "You're starting to be fun to be around again." I thought, I haven't been? No, you certainly haven't. So there's the advantage. What's the big disadvantage? Anybody know what's the big disadvantage of not being a senior VP of a big bank? There are 2. I am now higher risk.
Well, higher risk, I mean, just, you don't have the big bank behind you with as much capital.
Okay, but what does that mean to me personally? What happens at the bank personally that makes me happy? They cut me a check every 2 weeks. It's predictably the right amount, and it wasn't a bad amount, come to think of it. There's the big advantage of working for a big company is they put you on the payroll and they cut you a check and they offer you benefits, and you know. The advantage for me separately, because of where I was, is I was on the top floor in a corner office. Every place I went in the bank, people knew who I was. It was a big ego thing. I was, again, you know, depending on your view, I was a big wheel. And everybody knew who I was. I could go to the lunchroom, I could go to an office out of some other part of California, and my name and office sort of preceded me. So it's kind of a fluffy, ego-boosting sort of thing. Well, there's not much ego to say I own the smallest mortgage company in Utah, you know? But there's a peace associated with being independently self-employed. My son and daughter-in-law are here from Virginia this week, and I'm working about 2 hours a day. I'm working 2 hours a day because I can. Because that's the way small business, self-employed people are. Now, I will tell you this. Most of you, if you were in small business, would just be workaholics and you'd work 24/7. And I've been there when I started Walker Mortgage 15, 16 years ago. I was working lots of hours and working really hard and busting my butt. Now it's nearly 68 years old. I don't work that hard. People say, "You retired?" No, I work here. I work at the university. I do a lot. But I do it on my own terms. And that's probably what I think is the big advantage of being an entrepreneur. You can do things on your own terms. The downside, irregular income. I read a book some years ago that said you can never get rich on your own effort. If you're going to be wealthy, it's going to be because other people are generating income for you. The person who owns a McDonald's franchise never goes in the place. And he pays 40 people decent wages, pays all the utilities, et cetera, and makes about $150,000 a year. In fact, if you don't clear $150,000 a year, you're at risk of McDonald's taking away your franchise. You're not running it well enough. So the kind of small business I'm in depends entirely on me and my effort. And so the income is a little bit irregular. If I had 40 loan agents and they all made $200 a month for me, I'd have $8,000 a month, right? So I have to work fairly consistently to make that same amount of money because I don't have those 40 people. By contrast, the advantage is I don't have those 40 people all camped on my door wanting a piece of me all day, every day. In California, I had 100 employees. I said to myself one day, if I give those people all 5 minutes each, that's 500 minutes. How many minutes are there in an 8-hour day? 480. So just one 5-minute interview with each of those 100 employees and my whole day is shot. I haven't got a thing done. Well, luckily, they don't all come to you every day, but it feels like it. And instead of those, the supervisor of this 12 or that 12 or that 20 comes and wants an hour. It's almost better to do 5 minutes a person, right? So this way, I have a lot of latitude over my own time, but I'm the last person to get money out of Walker Mortgage. The very last person to take money out of that little company is me. And that's the trade-off. Now, not everybody has the personality to deal with this irregular income, to deal with the uncertainties of entrepreneurship. And if you don't, your life will be miserable. In which case, you may as well jump in the treadmill with everybody else and try and push past a few hundred and get a little farther up. I remember when I took this job at American out in California, I was a vice president, and my wife's like, somebody said, well, that's nice. Terry's a vice president. He must be pretty good. I said, I'm actually the 142nd vice president in terms of chronological order. Then I became a senior vice president. That sounds like a big deal, right? I was number 35. So that was still a big layer. And then the next job would have been executive vice president. There were only 5 of those. And then finally there was just one president. So even with a title in a big bank and a lot of authority, I'm 3 people away from having anything to say about my own life except negotiate my bonus structure and negotiate my performance at the end of every year. I had occasion in many times to sit with the president of the bank in a small 4-person room discussing bank issues. It's fun. It's heady being at that high level. It's intense. It's frightening. It's anxious. You're only ever this far from an odd comment that puts you in another category. And so I like being an entrepreneur because I like the idea that I own myself. I just have a handful of people to keep happy. And I get to see a pretty immediate result of my effort and a very immediate result of my failures. And that's probably the difficulty with being in your own. You own all the ups. Everything good that happens to you, and you own all the downs. Everything bad happens to you personally. I've had occasion as a big banker to write off tens of thousands of dollars of mistakes. And it always seemed fairly easy because it was real money, but it wasn't my money. Now, every mistake I make, real or imagined, is connected to my own personal wealth, my own personal psyche. And that is the pain of entrepreneurship. Now, I don't want to just tell you my life story and all of that. I want to spend a few minutes talking about the real estate world because as it has evolved in the last few years, it's been a little bit crazy. And as you have just become adults in the last few years, you're not sure what the real world really looks like because you don't have any historic perspective. Well, I've been doing this for 39 years, And so I have some historical perspective. And I can tell you that interest rates for residential mortgages are near my lifetime lows. This is a great time to finance a house. There's been few better times. This is the 100-year storm. Prices are pretty manageable. Affordability, that is affordability in terms of the average wage earner and the average price house and the average mortgage debt, is as good as it's been in Utah in my entire lifetime. More people can afford houses now with these prices and these interest rates than ever before. And you should know that we're making loans in the threes, 30-year fixed rate loans in the threes. In my career, I have made 30-year fixed rate loans at 14.5. So a payment on $100,000 in the threes is well less than $500. In the 14.5s, a $100,000 payment is $1,500. So you have to make 3 times as much money then as you do now in order to afford the same house. The same debt, not the same house, but the same debt. And so what that says is people today can have more house and at the same constant share of income than they could almost ever in my banking career. In my personal life, I have had loans from 3 to 11 on my personal houses. Always an insider special deal. And I've paid as much as 11 on my own personal house. When that was a discount, that was an insider deal. So you just don't realize, because you don't have any long-term perspective, memory, of where things have been, to know what a perfect storm we have right now for home ownership in the United States. Prices are down. Now, I hear a lot, well, the market's turned. I'll tell you a couple of facts. The available homes for sale in Salt Lake County is as low as it has ever been since 1997. So inventory, houses available on the market, are at a 15-year low. Now, what does that tell you? Those of you who understand the concept of supply and demand, what does that tell you about supply and demand? Supply is low, the answer, and home values are likely to go up, more so than down, certainly, right? We call it, it's been a seller's market. It's been a buyer's market because way more buyers than sellers. Backwards. Way more sellers than buyers. So the buyer has all these homes for sale and they can just lowball down the line until they find somebody desperate. So it's been very much a buyer's market. Lots of product on the market, lots of product for sale, lots of choices, lots of room to negotiate because there were a lot of houses for sale. I tell people a house is like a toilet. How so, Mr. Walker? When you need one, nothing else will do. But they're all pretty much alike. They all perform the same function. Yeah, there are big houses and little houses, but what is a house really? It just protects you from the elements, gives you a safe place to sleep and retreat to. When you're inside that 10 by 12 bedroom and you just have one little window to look out, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference whether you're looking at Mount Olympus or Mount Timpanogos or Great Salt Lake or Decker Lake. You're just safe in your own little environment. But, so it's been very much a buyer's market. And then it moved into a little bit of a more equilibrium, and now it's becoming a seller's market. So what does that mean about prices? More buyers, fewer sellers. Sellers can be more picky, right? Prices are going to edge up. So how many of you believe that we're just on the cusp of another big run-up in prices? Well, everybody can have an opinion, but my opinion is different. I'm going to show you something I didn't bring the scientific, I could have brought a scientific thing and projected it, but I'm just going to sort of tell you what this looks like. This is a graph of housing prices in Utah over the last 20 years. And if you drew a line through the average, there's a fairly steady progression. So you can project this line. Let's say this is 2002. You can project that line out to 2013. And here's the way this has worked. Average prices have been in a fairly narrow range. And then we get here. And here's the interesting thing. Prices today are just about where they would be if you took away this giant peak from 2002 to 2007 and closed off the big valley from 2007 to now. And the average price is almost right where it would be if you took away these two giant aberrations, market swings. So lots of people think we're right here, and we're going to have another one of those. The reality is we're probably just going to have this line, 3 or 3.5% a year. And we're going to continue to have that. We're not going to have a big spike. There's nothing in our economy that says we're going to have another big run-up of prices. The reason that inventory is so low is that sellers have gotten so discouraged. I have a son who lives in D.C. He has a house here. He would love to have sold it when he moved. It was down here. And he's now about to go on the market because he thinks we're just about back to where he paid for it in 2007. And he's just now equal. The debt and the value is just about equal. And so he just this last 2 weeks put it on the market. When you put a house on the market for sale by owner, what's the first thing that happens? Anybody have an experience with that? The answer is realtors call. And they call with all kinds of stupid stories. So I was just talking to one this morning while I was home, and the guy said, well, you know, you're asking way too little for this house. I could get about $310 for it. He's asking $285. And he said, you're right, and I'd have to write a check to sell it and pay you a full commission at $310. If I sell it for $285 myself, I'll have about the same amount of money. So who wins if you sell it at $310? The buyer doesn't win. The realtors win. So he's anxious to list my son's house. So here's what I tell him. Because people call and say, well, I'm a realtor and I drove by your house and I have a client who wants to buy your house. So right away your BS meter's, going into the red, right? Of all the houses for sale, the famous line from Casablanca, of all the gin joints in all the world, of all the houses for sale in Sandy, my house, my one house, just leaps off the page for your client. Pardon me if I don't believe it at all. So I said, here's the answer. Tell him you'd be happy to sign a single party listing. What is that? Anybody conjures up an image, doesn't it? What would a single party listing be? I have the right to sell this to a single person, herein named. So if you really have Mr. Jones who wants my house, write up a listing that says, if I sell your house to Mr. Jones, you'll pay me a commission. Can't sell it to anybody else. I can sell it to Mr. Jones. Well, that'll never happen. Why? Because Mr. Jones does not exist. Mr. Jones has yet to be found, certainly not named. So I say, just tell them, you bring by a client, a real client who wants to look at my house, I will sign a single party listing to pay you a commission for that one client. I'm not going to just list it and put it on the market, which means I'm going to pay 6% to somebody, not necessarily you. So in terms of real estate, we're getting into a time when the perception is, amongst most of you, and you are a representative of the market, that we're just on the cusp of having a big run-up. Now, that's good for me, because if you're sort of panicked and you think that this is a better buy now, I love that because that means you're going to buy now. And unless you're a cash buyer, about 1 out of every 1,000, you're going to need to finance it, and somebody like me is going to make some money in the context of that financing. So I'm pleased with this misinterpretation if it creates any urgency in your mind as a buyer. But the reality is, it's not an urgent situation. Interest rates, according to the Fed, are going to stay low at least until October, by design. House prices are going to creep up, not jump up, beyond here. There has been a fairly dramatic rise in the very short term, but it's just kind of getting back to where it ought to be, not to some place in the future that's going to be outrageous. We're not going to have, in these years, in some price ranges, in some geographies, we had price increases of 25 and 30% a year. Houses are doubling in 4 years. And then they fell from here to here. My personal house fell by more than a third of value. And it's just beginning now to turn around. Well, I'm not underwater and I'm not selling, so it doesn't matter very much to me how much my house is worth. I don't need to refinance it. I don't need to find a buyer for it. Don't need to pay off that loan that's on it. So it doesn't matter for me, but if I were a seller, I would be encouraged. I would begin thinking, as my son is, oh, maybe it's about time to go on the market. Then I read that the inventory levels are very low. And while that's not true across the board, it's true in geography and in price ranges. Let me just tell you this. Real estate law, real estate practices, real estate market values, real estate traditions are by the very definition local. And they're more local than you imagine. There's relatively little state law. And the state law mostly empowers counties. And so real estate law, real estate traditions, real estate practices, real estate prices are really very local issues. And so what you find out is that there are price ranges, upwards of 1 million. This market is still pretty crowded. There's still a lot of people who'd like to sell their $1 million house. At 150 and below, there's relatively few, and they get bought up like that quickly. And the hottest market that's kind of the affordable market is up to 300. Oddly enough, if you list your property for $299,900, you'll get about 30% more lookers than if you list it for $300 even. And the reason is, according to my real estate professional friends, people come to the table with limits in their mind. And if I really want to buy a house for about $275 or $280, so we'll look up to $299 because we think those are people we might bargain down, etc. We're just not going to look over $300 because we don't think that'll ever come down to $280. And so 301 is a whole different category than $299. And it's not just, the Walmart, Kmart, $9.99, don't make it $10. It's that 300 is kind of a barrier. And so there's a very, very active market below 300,000. And there's a much less active market as you go north of 300,000. So if you're in the market to buy a house for 300,000, you got to be on your feet. You got to be really quick. I can't tell you how many clients in the last quarter that have made offers and missed it, because they had 3, 4, or 5 competing offers and they were too late, or they were $1,000 off or whatever. And so the market is kind of, right now there is a sense of urgency. If you think you want to buy something under 300, you better make an offer, and you're probably going to, if you really want that house, you're going to make a full price offer with no concessions. 4 months ago, you'd make an offer on that house at about 92% of the asking price with 3% seller concessions. And now that worm has turned quite a bit. Below 300. You're buying at 450 or 475. You're still talking about price well below the asking price with seller concessions. But if you're buying a house under 300, you probably need to be quick on your feet. Now, that having been said, I'm a big proponent of entrepreneurship, but I came to that realization late in life, and I was kind of pushed towards it by the confluence of I'm never going to be president of the bank, one, and my new boss wants his own man, too. So I was sort of thrust out in my age 50-ish when it becomes very difficult to get another senior management job. And so I'm a dyed-in-the-wool committed small businessman. I'm not sure. I wish I had done it 10 years earlier or 20 years earlier. I may not have had the mindset to do it then. I may have been too wrapped up in obligations and country club memberships and all those things to do that. So it's not to say that you have to wait until you're 50 before you go do something else. But I would warn you that at your age, very few of you will be doing in 50 what you thought you wanted to do when you were 26. Very few of you will be doing that when you're 50. And so don't make lifetime careers. The chance that one of you will have the 40 years in the company and the gold watch retirement are just about zero. The reality is you're going to have 10 jobs in 4 different industries. And one of them may very well be an entrepreneurial period in your life. And it doesn't mean that I wouldn't take the right job right now and close my company. That right job would have to be a really better job than anybody in their right mind would offer me. But yeah, there's a part of me every other Friday that misses the corporate world. There are weeks like today. I've had 4 closings this week, made about $16,000. I'm as happy as I've been in a long time. And so, there are those highs and lows, but and then what was the last holiday? President's Day. So when was the last paid holiday Terry had? I think it was the 4th of July in 1996. So I'm missing 12 holidays a year. What do I do on holidays? I mostly work. It's a busy day. You hate to go out and be in the big crowds and everything. But nobody pays me. I only get paid. I use this line way too much. I only get paid if I drag my client across the finish line, kicking and screaming. And that's when I get paid. And I work to that end with a singular sort of dedication, not so much because I love my client and I really want them to get their house. I really need to drag them across the finish line so that I can get paid. And I need to do it in such a way that they're pleased enough to give my name to somebody else. Okay, that's my whole pitch for entrepreneurship. Couple of questions, anybody?
Are you a broker then? You sell the mortgage or do you keep them local?
Question is, am I a broker? And the answer is yes. There's nobody broker than me. I'm a broker. Here's how that works. Over here is is this house in Sandy. And the door. And over here is a house in Wisconsin with a little old lady with blue hair and $250,000 because her husband died and she just got all her money. And what she wants to do is put this money to work in a safe, reasonable way. And so she doesn't know about me and this house in Utah, but she'd like to invest this money in some kind of guaranteed no-risk situation because she's old. So here we have an outfit called Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae, and they make a secondary market for mortgages. So what happens is this person meets Terry, I meet Stearns Lending, and Stearns Lending sells the loan to Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae. So the money for this house comes from Freddie Mac, the Stearns, to the borrower. Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae then create mortgage-backed securities, and they sell investments to Solomon Brothers and Merrill Lynch, and they finally sell a mortgage-backed security, the little old lady in Wisconsin with blue hair. So you make your house payment, and it goes not to Stearns because they sold the loan to Wells Fargo. So you make your house payment, it goes to Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo takes out a piece for themselves. They take out the taxes and insurance, and they send the rest of the money to Freddie Mac. Freddie Mac gathers up all this money and say, we got a bunch of little old ladies in Wisconsin that are looking for a check, and we're going to send them all a check for interest on their bond. So you can go from this house directly to Wells Fargo. You could go directly to Stearns if they had a retail operation. But what do you get when you talk to big banks and big lenders? Impersonal service, phone calls not returned, unmotivated personnel. So you go looking for a boutique. I want to find somebody who really cares, who acts like they cares, somebody who doesn't get paid unless I win. And my mortgage is the same kind of mortgage everybody else gets. And this lady, she doesn't care if this is a mortgage-backed security in Florida or Utah or Colorado or California. She just wants to earn 6% on her money. And that's what a broker does. We just find a way. I tell people it's like, if you go to Wells Fargo, it's like going to McDonald's and ordering ice cream. What are your choices at McDonald's? Chocolate, vanilla, a combination of the two. What are your choices if you go to Baskin Robbins? 32 choices. They'll let you sample them. They'll talk to you about what's in them. So if you come to me, I'm the 32 choice person. I work like a broker is like the person that introduced you to your spouse. They knew you. They knew your potential spouse. They thought they knew both of you well enough to think you probably like each other. You probably get along. And so they introduced you. And eventually you got married and you had children, and one of them's the godfather. Picture that, you and a bunch of banks, based on your credit characteristics, the house you want to buy, the amount you want to put down, etc. Bank C is a perfect match for you. I'm going to introduce you and marry you off. The difference is, one or both of you are going to pay me a fee for doing it. Now what'd you do for the friend to introduce you to your husband? You made her your bridesmaid. She had to spend more money. You made him your best man. He had to write his own tux. So it costs you money to find this middleman most of the time, one way or another. And if I'm your middleman in the real estate world, somebody's going to pay me for doing it. I don't just do this because it's fun, although it's kind of fun. It's more fun to get first-time buyers into first-time homes and to work with people who really need your personal touch than it is to work with rich people who are buying million-dollar homes. And so that's kind of what our little boutique is. Personal touch, direct, immediate personal service, different from the big banks. You're never going to make your payment to Walker Mortgage. You're not even going to make it to Stearns Lending. You're going to make it to Wells or Bank of America or one of those big giant servicers, because there's real economies of scale at this end. Huge economies of scale at this end. Down here, you don't want economies of scale. You want personal, hands-on advice, service. Any other questions? I think we're done. Time-wise, are we done? Yeah, we are. Thanks for having me. It's always fun to meet young people.